We had a great time last week.
I'm going to record it, so there you go.
There we go. Aye.
Welcome again. Hey, Graeme.
Hello, and thank you for having me, said my first words of the night. Yeah, we did a tasting with you last week in real life, the first tasting that Connell and I have done in a very, very, very long time. And in fact, first tasting I think we've ever done in England together as members of Adelphi and Ardnamurchan. So yeah, it was a cracking night, wasn't it? We started off inside in the guest house, for those who know it, in Southport. But we had a sort of balmy, like 29-degree temperature or something, eh? So we quickly commandeered the courtyard outside for halfway and moved the entire tasting outside. And two guys got the free tasting of their life, didn't they? With no drams and a pile of us chatting at them. But it was a nice night. It was great. And that was on Tuesday last week. And Connell and I were then on the road until Sunday, all over England, doing events and visits and finishing up at the Midlands Whisky Festival with Nichols and Perks, back up the road on Sunday from Birmingham, and then it's all of a sudden Thursday again. The days are flying by. If I appear that I'm in some sort of padded cell or something like that, it's because I'm actually about to move house. So I've got absolutely naff all left on the walls. I've managed to somewhat adorn the place with tonight's 6 whiskies, but I've literally got empty shelves and an empty wardrobe sitting in this room with me. So life is a little bit chaotic at the moment. So I'm quite glad I'm not stuck in England and I'm actually in the house to get stuff ready. But yeah, essentially we're going to try 6 of the newest Adelphis, which just came out a month or 2 ago. We've got some really cool stuff to try tonight. Some Springbank, a nice little cask strength blend that you might not have tried. We've got a couple of Diageo distilleries. We've got a mystery Breath of the Isles, which we'll reveal to you in a little while too. And we've even got a big stinking high ester Jamaica rum as well, just to throw something else into the mix, you know. So we've got real variety of all sorts of ages, cask types, different distillates, and even booze categories tonight. So lots to cover. If anyone does fancy that's hiding in the background without a camera, feel free to join. Otherwise, we've got a cozy night for the 5 of us on screen tonight. But feel free at any point tonight to have some written chat. We'll do a little poll at the end. We've sold all the packs, but we'll see how many people are actually coming out for the tasting tonight. But I think we've got about 9 or 10 of us in the group actually online at the moment. I'm an open book, so please just any questions you have, any points you want to cover, anything that I've not talked about that you want to mention. We'll focus mainly on Adelphi tonight, not so much on Ardnamurchan, but we are, you know, the same folk, the same brand, the same owners. So I'm quite happy to delve into Ardnamurchan a little bit tonight as well. But the prime focus will be on some cool independent bottlings, okay?
Okay, so where do you want to start, Graeme?
Yeah, I was just going to make that important point that the order that it was posted out to you, or that they were on the website, is not necessarily the order we're trying tonight. Were all the samples actually labeled, Victor? They didn't have numbers on them, or?
Yeah, they're all labeled. They're all labeled. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to start perhaps confusingly with a Springbank. So you might not have expected us to blow the doors off the tasting with a Springbank 21-year-old, but we've basically got a low ABV, triple distilled. I have to be careful because there's a big bright red recording button flashing in the corner here, but I am happy to unofficially disclose that this is a triple distilled variant from the Campbelltown distillery. We aren't legally allowed to put that on the bottle. Springbank are not shy about protecting their brands, as they may well, you know, be congratulated for doing. Victor's showing you the bottle there. I'll just share with you if you can see that. Hopefully that's working. That's what it looks like in real life. Let me zoom in a wee bit for you too. So we've got a 21-year-old Springer. If we zoom in ever so slightly, sorry, my mouse is loving life at the moment. One of my kids spilt some juice on it. We've got some flying Springbank just now. Let me try and twist that back over.
So this is a triple distilled Springbank, which means
Yeah,
it's one of their variants. Is that right?
that's correct. So we've
Without putting words in your mouth.
aye, we have I've just literally saved that file. That's cool. Anyway, you saw what it looked like. We'll be wonky horizontal drinkers by the end of the night too. Essentially, as Victor says, you know, there's three liquids which are distilled and branded and put together at Springbank. You've got the typical Springbank, which is lightly peated, double distilled. You've got Hazelburn, which is triple distilled and unpeated. And then you've got Longrow, which is double and heavily peated. All of them, Hazelburn will contain some peat because they don't necessarily have a huge break between distillations and runs and whatnot. And occasionally it may even have lightly peated distillates in there too. There's not too much else to say in terms of, you know, before we get stuck into it. I've got the tasting notes to show you afterwards, the official ones that we've put together, but I'd rather let you guys lead the chat there. Now that you know it's triple distilled, and you'll also now know it's 43.4%. That is cask strength, by the way. So pretty hefty reduction in over 21 years there, particularly for a triple distilled spirit. So the Angels have been greedy on this one. And you know, it's a delicate spirit, but it's got good age, but the ABV is low. So I think actually this makes sense to start to try as a first dram, especially when we're all got, you know, full taste buds, faculties in control there, and we can really appreciate it, because this is, you know, it's no cheap everyday dram. We really don't get many Springbanks in the Adelphi stable. And frankly, you just can't buy Springbank on the market directly from them for a long time. So I'm happy to disclose this came from a private individual or individuals who own this cask together, and we were happy to bottle it.
I mean, we were, you know, we do very well. You're very generous with your allocations with the Southport Club, and with this one we got 2 bottles. So we drank one last week in the guest house, and we shared this one out tonight. And that's the way I think we should roll with this. Is you know, where it's just super rare, let's drink it.
Yeah, you know, I think that's definitely to be applauded, Victor. Absolutely, you know, well done to you for essentially getting this out to 2 tastings worth of people, you know, and you'll even have a little bit left to go into some of the bars. In fact, we raffled off the auction.
Yeah, we did. We raffled off the bin end last week, so somebody got a quarter or a third of a bottle. So. In fact, most of that stuff got drank on the night. There was people sharing it out, so I don't know who took it away, but
it was a good dram to start with last week, and hopefully the same again. I've been really a spoilt guy recently. I've had an awful lot of tastings, including Springbank this week, so I'm pretty delighted with that. So yeah, Peter's been chiming in there with his thoughts from last time. More than welcome honest feedback. So, you know, I'm sure there's some Springbank fans in the room. It's pretty rightly adored in the industry, isn't it? They do a huge amount of things right, not just on the liquid level, but from a production level, keeping everyone employed locally. You know, there's a huge amount of people in the industry that would love to work for Springbank. And it's quite hot news when a job comes up. Just before, when I was looking to come on board with Adelphi, they were hiring for basically a long haul export manager based in Asia, or traveling to Asia regularly to sell Springbank. You know, extremely sought after job in the industry. But the key caveat was you have to move to Campbelltown. There's absolutely no you can't get away with living elsewhere and traveling there a couple of times a week. That's just part of the deal down there. So they do end up with a team of people there that really do love the stuff and the local area, which is great to see. Sorry if things are going a bit haywire. My mouse is genuinely moving of its own accord a little bit tonight. The last week or so, after having some liquid introduced to it by my 3-year-old. Anyway, what do you think? Good, bad? Gary's enjoying it, I can see. I wouldn't say it necessarily needs any water. I've poured myself a proper dram of it because I'm a spoilt guy, and it's the first one on the left there. It's nearly gone.
Well, my bottle's gone, so I've emptied this one. It's gone.
Yeah. This is going back to the warehouse on Tuesday next week, all the stuff that was left over from the England trip. So I'm doing my best to send as little back as I can.
Good on you. Good on you.
But yeah, hopefully peachy is a good idea there, Philip. I'll show you what our official notes were on this one. Let me share the screen. I've got them all open. Springer. And if you can read what I've saved it as, I've just given the game away as well. But on the top there, can you see the tasting note, Vic?
Yeah, I can see that.
Cool. So the way we do tasting notes, there's 5 of us in the sales and marketing team at Adelphi. There's myself and Connell, who some of you met last week, the sales director. There's Jenny Carlson from Sweden. And then there's Alex and Antonia Bruce. Alex being the MD and Antonia being his sister. He's been with us for about 11 years. So far, I've been in the company just over a year, I should say as well. When we do our tasting note sessions, it's always on Zoom at the moment. And we basically get a little box of everything that's coming out on the new Adelphi list. Bearing in mind, quite a lot of these casks were sister casks, where some were released in Europe and a sister was released for the rest of the world. That's our really feeble and failed attempt to get some more liquid out there, but it's not reducing the demand in any way. So what we do is we get our big bundle of pre-release samples, and we simply sit down for 2 or 3 or 4 hours with a spittoon, I should add, but some of the stuff like this will not be going in the spittoon. That'll be going down the gob, and then the 5 of us basically just shout words at each other. I write down all my own notes. Jenny collates them as some form of minutes, and then the next day or over the next few days, I personally try to collate these together into some form of cohesive tasting note. So these don't actually really get printed out often. They're at the visitor centre. We took them to the festival, for example, but they don't go on the bottles themselves. But we will put them on the website and send them to retailers and bring them to tastings. It's more for a record for ourselves as much as anything. So you can see there, you've got one of only 247 bottles, and the first type already, it is actually 43.4. And then our cask details, it's a refill bourbon hoggy. So I think that works brilliantly over a decent amount of time. We talk about the color and the beading. I showed Victor and the guys what beading was, which sounds terrible, right? But I'll show you just now. If I just stop sharing the screen for a little second, if I can control my mouse.
I'm trying to get flat lemonade out of this, but I'm really. Does anybody get the flat lemonade?
I get the lemon, and it's quite tart. Whether it goes as far as lemonade, I kind of get your point, but I definitely get a slightly tart lemon edge. Mm-hmm. It's more like a lemon, lemon tart actually.
Yeah, a tart lemon tart. No, yeah. That's a very good shout. Flat lemonade, I remember, was Antonia that said it that night. And this is the sort of dram we did try it first out of everything that night as well, for the same reasons. And we left it in the glass, and we were still going 3 hours later. So it really does open up over time and reveal some more details too. So when we talk about beading, it's a thing that Charlie McLean is our chief nose. He's been on the nosing panel, the blending panel, for a long time. And he uses this, and he's taught Alex Bruce it. And literally you shake your bottle, and then the froth, the head that it throws, that's the beading that we're talking about. And it's a very rudimentary looking way to kind of discover a loose ABV on the spirit, but it also has things to do with age and the type of cask that was in there too. So for example, usually slightly higher ABV and younger spirit will throw a higher bead. And it's just something we talk about. It's not anything to dwell on too much, but it can reveal differences in your whiskies if you shake a couple of them up and kind of contrast them. So that's what we talk about there. Final things to say, as we say, you were talking about the flat lemonade. We've got things like panettone. We talk about a lot of cakes and confectionery in the Adelphi House of Tasting Notes. Turkish Delight, I definitely felt it got quite floral, rose petally after a little while. And you've got a lot of kind of buttery, pastry sort of style stuff there as well, don't you? But there is that, the mustiness was talked about in Fisherman's Friends, you know. Springbank is famous for having quite a funky, farmhousey distillate, you know, Hazelburn being a slightly more delicate version of it. But hopefully that shows you some of the things that we were talking about. The most important thing, of course, being, do you like it? It doesn't really matter whether you agree with our tasting notes or not. In fact, I would quite like it if you don't, because it's such a subjective thing, you know. But there's 5 of us putting an approximation of what we think, and it is a bit tongue-in-cheek as well. I will admit that, you know, it's not to be followed religiously. I would never. Tasting notes are fine if you're in a shop and it's on the shelf and you're 95% convinced, and you think, yeah, that sounds up my street. But you should never think that is what it will taste like, you know, because it is someone's interpretation at the end of the day. And especially for a Springer, for example, this one here, if I look it up, retail price was round about £330. So it's not a cheap dram. You're probably not going to be buying this on tasting notes alone. You're probably having been allowed to have a taste of it in the shop, or you're simply a fan of Adelphi and or Springbank. It's a nice little combo, I think. So yeah, hopefully a good first dram of the eve.
Does that, going back to beading, does that shaking the bottle do anything to the whiskey inside?
No, that'll all settle out after a while. All back to normal now. You're just agitating it all, getting all the liquid, all the
whiskey
alcohol.
goes back to how it was before you shook it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It won't last long. You know, these things do fairly get bounced around on their way to shops.
Well,
and
DPD, yeah.
And unfortunately, a tragic amount of them don't necessarily make it there intact either. So the APC and the couriers do their own beading tests, but they're not actually looking at those. They're just seeing how much a van can be rallied around the country, you know. But yeah, that's the Springer.
So I should say we've got a few bottles of Adelphi left over from the allocation and from the previous allocation. Actually, we put them on the website just this evening. It is a little bit of an all sorts, but we thought we'd save them for you guys who were on the tasting. If you want one, go and pick them up. If you don't, then I'm sure somebody else will pick them up fairly soon.
Victor,
I saw that you're already in there, Stuart. That's why I thought I'd shout out to everybody else.
I just happened to notice them popping up there. So my apologies to anyone, but anyway, I bought them sight unseen, but we're going to try them tonight, so I'm looking forward to that.
Well, actually, the ones in the shop we don't have tonight. They're just bits and pieces of the Adelphi allocation that were kind of left over that we stuck in there. And make sure you open them and drink them.
Aye, that's the
only thing I'd say.
compulsory purchase order.
Yeah.
I see Peter's put the link in the chat there as well if you need it. We're going to move on. I think we did the other night, we saved the rum until last, but I'm going to go in for it right now. And then we're going to build, because not everyone loves these sort of things, in all honesty. I think Nigel and a few of the guys thought it was their favorite thing, and everyone else wanted to batter me and said, what are you doing, you know? So we're going to try the Clarendon 12-year-old. And then we've got some pretty heavy sherried drams and some nice peaty drams to, shall we say, reset the palate afterwards, if that's your kind of the thoughts you're on. So we'll go on with Clarendon 12-year-old. So do we have anyone in the room who's right into their rums? So
yeah,
cool.
some, but I
Fair
might.
enough. Yeah.
I think either only the second, maybe first or second Clarendon I've had though.
Yeah, fair play. You won't forget them in a hurry, I would suggest. They're characterful, heavily intense distillates. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of rum production and rum history and all that, because we're not on a rum tasting per se. But Jamaica, I guess what I would say is a lot of ways that people discuss rum is misleading. By and large, a lot of rum can be legally, you can adulterate a lot of rums, but that's not to say that certain countries don't have very restrictive GIs on them, and that there's a lot of smaller scale rum distilleries that are very well adored and that produce some absolutely amazing liquid. So I think when people, if you're just kind of slightly into your rums, if you're early in the rum journey, you might be used to a pretty sweet, caramelly, toasty flavored liquid, which tastes of molasses potentially. It might be a spice rum too. So remember, it might also have additives in that regard too. With Adelphi, with anything we bottle, it's just got to taste good. That's the very basic measurement that we use. Then we've got to take into account provenance, do other people have it? How does our price compare? Are we going to be able to sell it for a price where people will happily buy it? For example, we've been offered other Springbanks than the one you just tried that we would have had to sell for £500, £600, £700, £800 a bottle. And we're not really willing to do that for a lot of products. So essentially, if it tastes good, we will consider it. And Connell and I actually put the rum program together recently, earlier this year. And to show you how small the company is, essentially, Connell phoned me one day and said, "We've not done Adelphi rums for a very long time. Should we do some?" It was as simple as that. And I have to admit, I was into my rums in quite a big way a few years ago.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of rum tastings in my old employer in the Good Spirits Company in Glasgow. So I jumped at the chance. We spoke to Alex Bruce, the MD, and he was right up for it. We've done a few in the past before my time. And we basically just said, find us some samples then, please. You've got some contacts. The next week, I had 9 rum samples on my desk. And I took them home. Basically, between Alex and I, we wrote up our notes, we scored them, we decided what ones we recommended for buying. And I recommended 5, and Alex recommended 4. And I'm happy to say that 4 out of the 4 were the same. And I had a 5th outlier that I basically convinced him to buy as well. So we've bought 5 casks of rum, which will be coming out in the kind of next, 12 to 24 months roughly. But this one in particular, I thought was ready to go right now. So this is, let me show you the bottle. It's a distillery called Clarendon, which is gigantic, by the way. Much more equivalent to a grain distillery than to a single malt distillery in terms of capacity. You're talking tens of millions of litres rather than millions of litres. The specific rum, if you know Clarendon, is actually called Money Musk, Monymusk. They do things like Wedderburn and all sorts of stuff there. Also, a lot of Clarendon goes into things like Captain Morgan's, by the way. So it can take on a far different flavour than this. Generally, rums are talked about, or true rums, I'm talking, you can tell by looking and tasting this. There's no sugar, there's no colouring added to this, no filtering. Cask strength of 56.8%. Generally, we talk about rum as either pot still rum or column still rum. If it was column still, it would be more like a grain whiskey in that it would retain a little bit less character. This is quite clearly, without even me telling you, so it's a pot still rum. This is very flavorful, intense distillate, as I say. So I would be really intrigued to hear. I just wanted to throw this in as an example of something else that we do at Adelphi. Victor, especially, you tried it last week for the first time and it probably destroyed everyone, but how's it revisiting it?
I think you're quite right to do it early, Graeme, because I think you did it, I think it was second last week. And you kind of, it was such a diversion, the other spirits that we had, that I think it took a few people by surprise. Tasting tonight, it's definitely not, like those sweet molasses, spicy things that you see in Tesco's.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of flavour. It really is quite intense. I think that grassy licorice that you've got on on the tasting notes come through really well, and
Yeah.
the Granny Smith apples. I really like it, and I really like it more this week than I did last week. I was just a bit surprised with it. I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, as I say, we wanted to put it on the tasting, but I think in hindsight, you're right. It works better at the start of the night. Peter was saying, I didn't know there was column still rum. Yeah, quite an amount of it. So, for example, if you think about the context I used to use was Bacardi, the biggest rum distillery, one of the biggest distilleries in the world. They've got 5 column stills there. And a column still, we're not going to go into the detail, but it's hugely more productive than a pot still. Pot still we refer to as single-use stills. Column stills are called continuous stills because after you fill your pot still with mash or whatever it might be, in this case it might be molasses, you turn it on, you vaporize the alcohol, you collect the alcohol on the other side, and you turn it off again. And you have to clean it all out, refill it, do it again. So it's quite labor intensive. A column still was invented slightly later by Robert Steen, or various people did it. They're also known as a coffee still, a guy in Ireland called Aeneas Coffee. I'll tell you in a wee second, Gary. He invented them, fine-tuned them, whatever you want to say about him. And basically they can go 24 hours a day for months at a time. And they can produce very, very high strength spirit, right up to 96% plus. Whereas a pot still would literally explode if you pushed it that far. So they innovated the spirits worldwide. They are allowed for far higher efficiency, but arguably lower character. And I'm not saying lower quality, that's the key difference, but lower character spirits. So for example, 5 column stills at Bacardi going 24 hours a day, they can produce 100,000 litres of spirit in 24 hours at Bacardi, which is wild. That's a huge amount. Arden American Distillery, we have 2 shifts a day, 6 days a week, and we can produce, we have produced in excess of 400,000 litres in our biggest year. So it tells you the contextual difference of a column still versus a pot still. Why do you care? What flavour would that relate to? Anything on a column still will taste a little bit less of its initial flavour than something on a pot still. So a pot still rum, and indeed the reason many of us probably like malt whiskey made on a pot still is the fact it retains quite a lot of character of what went into there. So yeah, happily will accept people saying this isn't their favourite liquid that they've ever tasted. But if you're right into your booze, if you describe yourself as a booze nerd, I think this is intriguing at worst, I would like to think.
I think it's more than intriguing. I don't think you're going to switch me from malt whiskey, but it's definitely. No. I'd be quite happy to have a go at this for a weekend.
Yeah, I unashamedly love it. But even if I had this sitting on my shelf in this quantity, it would last a wee while. You wouldn't reach for it every weekend of the year. But it's just cool to, it shows you what's going on in the booze world. We've not invented Jamaican rum. It's been going on for hundreds of years quite happily on its own.
So
maybe shining a light on it is good as well.
Yeah, one of my questions would be, a lot of the rum that gets sold in bars in the UK goes with Coke, Coke and ice, and it makes for quite a sweet, but actually quite a tasty, refreshing drink.
Mm-hmm.
I always used to go for it after I'd had about 8 pints.
Sure.
And it never did me any good, but I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this kind of rum, is this? You wouldn't put anything in this, would you?
I wouldn't suggest so, but it'd be great long if you made a highball out of this. It would be really tasty. Yeah. But also, these big Jamaican rums are kings in tiki drinks and in cocktails like Mai Tais and things like that, which are true tiki drinks that are booze heavy and light on the mixers. You'll often find 2 or 3 or 4 rums being mixed together and chosen for different characters. Right. And there's always a high ester is the way of describing this rum, super fruity. There's always a high ester rum in a classic Mai Tai, quite often one called Smith and Cross, which is 57% pot still Jamaican rum. So it's pretty close to this actually in flavour. But yeah, that would be great with that sort of thing. If you made just a a simple little old fashioned there with quite a light sugar, you know, golden castor sugar or something syrup. That would be a good way of taking the edge off the spirit, but still, you know, drinking it in a different way, I would suggest.
Cool. I've got a wee dribble left in this tasting bottle. I'm gonna try something else with it later on this weekend.
There's a drink I would suggest looking up, which I'll put in the group, called a tea punch, and it's traditionally made with rum agricole, which is a rum that's made from sugar cane juice rather than molasses, and it results in a very grassy spirit. But this one is made from molasses, but it's got a very similar property to rum agricole and things. If you ever try that, even close to, I'm getting right down my old bartender rabbit hole here. Do you know what'd be nice? A caipirinha, because this is not unlike a cachaça or something like that. So bit of sugar and ice there, and some citrus. That would be banging, I'm sure. Okay, just to round off the Clarendon, price wise, you know, it's not another everyday drinker. It's £100 retail. You know, saying that, in the Caribbean, a 12-year-old rum will have evaporated quite quickly. You know, the Angel's share in the Caribbean climate is far higher than we have in the UK. So we did get 402 bottles out of this. I have mentioned on there it was a Madeira cask, but I don't think it was full-time Madeira. It's not got a big blush color or flavor to it. It came to us in a Madeira cask. I'm happy to confirm that. But beyond that, we didn't really, you know, we weren't able to track back its previous life. So yeah, hopefully something interesting. We won't dwell on it for too long.
Nice one, thank you.
No bother.
Does
I would
anyone,
suggest,
before
as
we
a
move
tip,
on, does anyone really, there was a couple of people last week really didn't like it. Is there anyone here would say, that's just not for me?
But I'd say, Victor, I'm the same as you. You wouldn't get me off Scotch malt whiskey to go on to that. I don't think.
But
I'm not going to turn into a rum drinker, I don't think.
But what did you, I mean, you know, critically, or what did you think of that one tonight? Did it turn your nose up and say, my God, what's he done? Or is it,
no, it wasn't horrible. It was palatable, but compared to a nice single malt, no, not for me at all. No.
Okay.
fair, I'll happily accept that. Hey, you know, the best I can ask is give it a go. It's the sort of thing, if you didn't come to a tasting like this, you might have been unlikely to ever taste in your life. So I'm just happy
I've
to.
not had much rum at all, so that's new. So like you say, I mean, give it another go. You know, your second experience is different than your first, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I put on the tasting note, it's not for the faint-hearted, you know, but it's just an example of some other booze that's kicking around in the world, and they've got kind of a proud history over there too. I think when I was selecting the cask and deciding whether to buy it or not, I thought, is this a true representation of Jamaican rum? So we're not comparing it to single malt whiskey, we're comparing it to other rums, and specifically other Jamaican rums. And for me, having tried a lot of these liquids, yes, we've captured that in a bottle. So I'm happy with it, happy to accept it's not for everyone. It's far from a universally popular liquid, but it's out there. And it just shows that we've got, you know, our decision-making process, even though it's a different liquid entirely, was the same. So
Graeme, for what it's worth, I've had a lot of rum, and normally one thing I find with rum, like it or loathe it, it's usually very, very bold. And the thing I like about this is a little more understated. And like you said, putting this in a highball, I could definitely get on board with that.
Yeah.
Really, I don't know about an old fashioned. There's a bar in London which does a brilliant rum old fashioned, which I love. And personally, I don't think this would stand up, but in a highball, I think this is fabulous. I could really see myself on a beach somewhere. Probably not on the coast of Essex, I admit, but you never know.
Yeah. Do you know a little bit of one of these sweet Rubicons, like a mango or a papaya or something like that, would probably be quite a tasty, trashy drink as well. But yeah, if only we all had loads of 12-year-old Clarendon to throw around and try with different things, eh? But yeah, you know, it's funny, Chris, that you say the word understated there. For people that have just come into it, they'll be like, this is the least understated thing I've ever tried. But in the grand scheme of rums, it's a pretty approachable Jamaican rum, that, which might sound weird to some of you. Cool. what I would suggest then, we'll go on to dram number 3. I would suggest you smash dram glass number 2 to pieces and never drink from it again, because it will taste like this forever. But no, seriously, I probably wouldn't just be pouring a Scotch whiskey straight into that glass without rinsing it out if you're only on the one sample glass. And if you are, you need to speak to your friendly local Southport Whiskey Club runner and get some more glassware. But I'm sure we're not in the realms of such poverty here. I mean, I've literally got 3 left that aren't packed as well. So I've got some that I half-inched from Glasgow Whiskey Festival a few years ago.
Did we not give you a glass last week? Did you steal one of our glasses last week?
No. I would do no such thing. And also, if I did, it would never have survived for a week on the road after that either. So it would have been pointless. I tell you what, I was going to suggest what we're going on to next, but I'm happy to be led by the group. So we've got a twin heavily sherried drams. We've got the Blair Atholl and the Teaninich. My idea was to do the sherries first. They're both unpeated. And then we've got a 14-year-old Highland Park, and we've got a cask strength Adelphi peated blend, which actually contains a little bit of peated Ardnamurchan. So would we prefer peat or sherry just now? Unless anyone feels very strongly either way, we'll just go with my suggestion. Cool. Let's go with sherry and see if we made the right call. The 4 of these are pretty full on in their own respects, but I think conventional wisdom, I would normally finish on some peated stuff. So we'll see how we get on. So let's go for the Blair Atholl in that case then, please.
I do love a Blair Atholl.
Yes, it's very underrated.
I was pleased to see this.
Even Blair Atholl itself, it's taken off now. You see Carmore have just released another Blair Atholl single malts of Scotland. Their batch 6 is now, they've got a Blair Atholl now.
Yeah.
So
it's kicking around now. You're right. Funnily enough, Grant, you may well know, I know we follow each other online and things. I did used to work for Carmore for a fair time. So I was aware of, Blair Atholl's I was really educated in it at the Carmore days of my career, to be honest. I mean, we used to sell quite a lot of indie stuff in the Good Spirits too, but so for those of you, there it is.
You probably had a taste out of that at one time, Graeme, I would think.
I'm sure I did. When our branding used to look more like my Adelphi tasting notes. I'm glad it's had a facelift, which the guys will be happy to hear me say. I made no secret of that. So Blair Atholl is the home of bells, essentially, in a nutshell. I'm not going to go down the history line too much, but it is a Highland whiskey just outside of Pitlochry, rather than actually Blair Atholl, to be honest with you, but it's pretty close to it. Very importantly, 1 L on the whiskey, 2 L's on the town, for reasons only known to Diageo, really. And that's about it, to be honest, with Blair Atholl as a distillery. It's existed for quite a long time. You didn't historically used to see a lot of well-aged Blair Atholl on the independent market, because the lion's share of it would hit 3 years and it would be blended. That was its primary fodder. The indies have started to get hold of it. It does exist on the Flora and Fauna range and sometimes in the special releases from Diageo. But yeah, an underappreciated distillate, I would suggest. I'll show you what it looks like in real life. I realized I didn't show you the Clarendon as well. I was scared of it flipping around. So that's it. Decent color when you see it in real life. There, and we've put single estate Jamaican rum on there. And then if I come back and I show you the waffle.
You need to do a bit of sharing there, Graeme.
Sorry, I'd not even finished clicking, have I? Do you know what? I've got too used to doing real tastings now. I can't even use a laptop. You can see the bottle shots there, can you?
That's it. Cool.
So that's the Clarendon. Jesus, it's doing it again. Sorry. It's a really fun laptop to use just now. So that's Sideways Clarendon for you. Let me show you for the moment vertical Blair Atholl. So you can see there right off the bat, you know, in the little drams, they're pretty dark. In the full bottle, it's pretty hefty. So, I mean, you can even literally see some moisture on there. Our photographer is awful good. So details there, I'll show you on the tasting notes properly, but we've got 284 bottles of a 12-year-old at 54.5%. And as I've already told you, sherried, which you'll not be surprised to find out. So I have to say, for me, I'm going to be entirely honest, this divided the team of 5 of us on the night. And not because of quality, but it's just a very unusual, not typical Blair Atholl, actually. It's pretty savoury. I was talking about things like Lee and Perrins I've got on my tasting note here. I talked about Worcester sauce, and some people are talking about tamarind. Nail polish is a great shout. It did have a certain solvent, almost painty sort of thing to it as well. It's really on the extreme end of the scale flavor wise, you know. It's not maybe as gentle as some Blair Atholls that you see, and maybe not as nutty as some that you might see out there. But I think it's got a really captivating nose. This is the first time I properly nosed it since we did the tasting notes. We had this at the Midlands Festival, but it was just part of a big table of drams, so I didn't really investigate it much on Saturday. But yeah, it's almost like dental chair. You know, it's reminding me of that sort of just that experience of when you sit there and you've got that heavy clove oil in the air and things as well. But I like it.
I like it. It's a wee bit challenging though. It's for all, you know, it's not like any Blair Atholl I've ever had.
No, I think it's a fair point. And you know, that's part of the single cask world, isn't it? Is we do want to bottle stuff that's not the same as the last 3 Adelphi Blair Atholls, you know. So we will do so. But I think there's something I love about that in the independent bottling world is sometimes, because we did a Mortlick at the tasting with you guys last week, didn't we? Yeah, now that I say it, I was worried. The 17-year-old.
Aye.
Yeah, good. We've done so many events this week. But that was a really atypical Mortlick. It was really herbaceous. It was really green. It was quite delicate, dare I say it, but it wasn't a big meaty, beefy Mortlick full of savoury flavours. And the same with this Blair Atholl. I think it's really cool. You know, sometimes on the indie world, if you're buying a single cask, you just want your classic house style of that distillery just amped up a little bit. And sometimes you want to just veer entirely the other way and say, let me see what that tastes like in a different circumstance. So let me show you the tasting notes for this and see whether you think it's a heap of nonsense or if you agree. Is that zoomed in enough for everyone, by the way? Is that all right? Cool. So first fill PX, pretty chunky amount of time to be in a first fill PX. But I don't think
that's why it's got that kind of dental, kind of savoury flavour.
Yeah, it's pretty grippy, is the word I sometimes use for it. Really, it's beyond oily. You know, it's kind of like tannic oiliness that's kicking in there. I'm totally getting the red laces. I wrote the red laces down the first time, really on the palate. Cola cubes again, yep. Engine oil was Alex's, who's a real motorhead. He always comes out with stuff from the garage. He said mint matchmakers as well, which I do think it's got menthol, eucalyptus kind of thing in the background there too. And a tiny bit of rubber, which is not, it's not for me tipping into rubbery, sulfury territory that would put me off with some sherries, but I like it. I'm pretty tolerant of that sort of flavor in my drams, actually. And yeah, lengthy finish, I think for sure we can agree with that. I would argue. But yeah, you know, another complex dram. That's 3. We've only had 3, and they're all entirely different. You know, they're worlds apart, all 3 of these. But that's a nice little, not messing around 12-year-old Highlander there.
Quite happy to try that tonight, because when it first got released, obviously with the colour alone, it just flew off the shelf. It's quite good to finally put my mouth to it.
Yes, and I think that's a great point. You know, we all think I think in this rarefied whiskey world, we all think of ourselves as being beyond marketing, and we talk about it's all about the taste, you know, natural color and all that. And then we put out an Delphi that looks like that, and every single person says, "Look at the color, man!" It's like, guys, I thought we don't care about color anymore. But you know, I'm the first person to be drawn by eye to that sort of thing as well. I'll happily admit that. But yeah, I'm really happy with that. It's pretty full on, but it's a good little sister to the Teaninich that I think we'll move on to now, because it's in the same world, similar age, similar Highland Diageo distillates, but very different flavor profile entirely. So I'm going to need to empty a glass very quickly.
It's very empty. Teaninich completely different.
Really good distillate. Okay, so Teaninich is a step darker. Sorry, that's my 1-year-old son crying in the background if you can hear it. I promise he's not in the room with me. You know, maybe a wee drop of Cask strength Teaninich would settle him quite quickly, in fact. So ABV on the Teaninich, sorry, is 58.8. And we've got an 11-year-old. Let me show you the bottle. Honestly, it's like using a laptop in reverse this tonight.
You did have me confused before. We didn't do the Mortlach last week. It wasn't with us, you did it.
Okay. Well, I obviously had a great time with you, Victor.
We had I tell you what we had last week. We don't have tonight. We had the latest Ardnamurchan, and then you brought a Cask sample.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. No, we did the Mortlach at the Liverpool bar the following night. You know, you get to that stage where you can literally remember exactly how you describe something and imagine a bunch of people listening to it, but it was the wrong place. So that's the Teaninich. For those of you who haven't heard of the distillery, it's up near Alness, Invergordon way, up in the Highlands. The closest distillery being Dalmore that you would know of. Invergordon Grain Distillery is pretty close by. If you were to zoom out a bit further, you'd get the likes of Glenmorangie, Balblair, Glenord are all relatively close to it as well. I grew up in that neck of the woods actually, so I'm from Inverness, and my grandparents were from Tain, which is the famous home of Glenmorangie. So I used to spend a whole lot of time going up and down the A9 there, and nobody in the world would ever know that there was this giant Diageo distillery just lurking off behind the trees, which nowadays now I know where it is. There's quite a big, huge chimney stack there as well. If you're approaching Dalmore to your right, you just look left and you can basically see Teaninich lurking in the background there. It's huge. It's a very large Diageo distillery. Sorry, Stuart, this is not the RAF bottling. So the RAF bottling was a sister cask of this, actually. We had some really decent sherried Teaninichs. So this was just out in the UK and Europe list. Probably 2.5 months ago it came out. Yeah, so it's a big distillery. The famous geek fact about this is that it was the first Scotch whisky distillery to have a mash filter. Now that's a gigantic, size of a tenement flat piece of machinery that you put in a distillery Diageo put it in a distillery to deal with harder to process malt. So it'd be stuff that their core distilleries would have to reject because maybe they're too big, they're too tough, too much husk, whatever it might be on the malted barley. They could send it to this hammer filter that would just destroy it and allow it to be processed and turned into money, frankly, is the unromantic truth. However, it's now become quite an experimental distillery because of that. It pumps out a lot of whiskey that goes into blends, as many Diageo ones do. But I think it's got a nice little niche in the independent world where people are starting to open their eyes to it. I have heard very secretive tales, very much off the off the record that I was told that Diageo have actually distilled rye at Teaninich in a Scottish fashion, which could be quite cool. I don't know if it will ever see the light of day, but they're using that mash filter. If you know rye as a product, then rye is famously more difficult to mash. In particular, it turns into much more thick, gloopy porridge than barley does. So if you were to just run it through a traditional pot still, there's a very good chance that the rakes would get stuck and it would be too thick to process. So you can't just decide, at Arden American, we can't just decide we're going to do a batch of rye whiskey tomorrow, because we would really fuck the distillery up. So they've got to be careful of those things. But anyway, I never heard about that, and you never heard about it, and we may never officially hear anything about it, but it does exist, I believe, somewhere. So it'd be cool to try it.
Keep our eyes open on it. Teaninich is another one that you're seeing a wee bit more in the indie market now, I think.
Yeah.
Than you did before, and I really like it as a whiskey. It's got that kind of fresh, grassy kind of thing to it, and this one, yeah, I just get grassy ginger.
You're dead right there. Loads of ginger. Let's see what we said about it. So yes, I remember I got in there with the wanky one of this tasting note, which is the Indonesian Cubeb, which if you've never heard of, I will happily let you off. But that's basically a peppercorn. It's not unlike a Szechuan peppercorn. It's actually used as a gin botanical quite often. So that's where I've actually come across it. And one of these gin experiences years ago where you got to actually try what Cubebs were. Kind of like very intense pink peppercorns anyway. But that's our way of not just simply saying pepper, you've got to be creative with your tasting notes. Dr. Pepper, I thought was a good shout on the night. Honey roast parsnips, that was one from Mr. Bruce, the MD, but it does have a nice earthiness about it for sure. And it comes out with a bit of water as well. Waxy old books, it does have a certain library feel to it on the nose. And definitely that, I agree with that oregano. I think it does have this nice kind of herbaceous thing in the background too. And honestly, Pete, please feel free to just sit there thinking, what a lot of nonsense these guys are talking about tasting notes wise, because they really are so subjective. We take hours to pull these things out, and it takes years for us to even feel comfortable saying these things out loud without, dying of embarrassment. But eventually I've just got to the stage where if I think it's there, I will happily tell you what I think. And if you disagree, cool. We've all got our own sort of neural tasting memories where it's all linked to things that we've tasted and smelled in our lives growing up, things that we've eaten. How transportative a nose or a taste of something can be. If you wander into a room somewhere and it smells of something in particular, whoosh, you can be brought back to a very specific time and place. So that's what we try to discover in our whiskeys sometimes too. And sometimes it might just remind you of another whiskey, which is then going down the rabbit hole even more, where you say, but what did that one taste like? But it's part of the fun, I think. So I'm now, after a few years in the industry now, I don't know, I'm probably at about 10 years in booze in total now, including bartending and that. I'm finally organizing a proper tasting note book where I will write down everything that I'm sampling properly in tasting note form, and then I will start to catalog them. I've always done it for a month or two at a time and then, fallen by the wayside. But it's something, if you want to do it on a personal level, it is worth doing, because the more you do it, the more you taste and the more you can pull out of it. It's really not that you can't taste it. That's not the correct word. It's describing it that's hard. It's articulation of the tasting notes that can be difficult. We've all had our nose in a glass somewhere and said, I don't know what that tastes like, but it's nice. That's a fine place to be if you never get beyond that too.
I think the crazier the tasting notes, the better. I mean, I don't know if you remember the London Whisky Club tasting with Ardnamurchan, but we had the suit of an old ship chimney. That's what.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Who's licking ship chimneys? I don't know.
Exactly. No, there's a really decent amount of inedible stuff described about in tasting notes, and you think, has anyone actually tasted those things? But we can quite confidently hope that that's what it might have tasted like, you know. I mean, I've not often been eating books in the last few years, you know, since I got out of uni. Times haven't been so tough, but I like to think we can imagine what it tastes like. Philip, I'm loving that, the inside of Paddington Bear's hat. So that is just a really cool tasting note. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And marmalade brioche as well. Yeah, it's definitely got that kind of bitter citrus to it. And there is a buttery quality to it as well. But that's the beauty of tasting notes, as I say. We all go our own way, whether we know what we're describing or not. How's that grab you, Victor, as a Teaninich fan?
I like this one. I would prefer to drink this than the Blair Atholl, and I'm usually a big Blair Atholl fan. It's I think one of the reasons I'm a fan of it is it's just dead easy to get to when you drive off the A9. You know, you see Pitlochry and you think, oh, I'll just nip in and pick up the latest distillery bottle.
Sure.
And it's usually pretty good. So, but it's nothing like that. The Blair Atholl we've had tonight. This Teaninich, yeah, you can get the Teaninich coming through it, even though it's it's been played around with.
Yep, I agree. I think it's more, it's a more straightforward dram. This, the Blair Atholl, literally minutes before the tasting, I was toying with putting the Blair Atholl after the Teaninich because I think it's more savoury, but I do think this is more intense and it's got a little bit more length to it as well, and a touch more ABV as well. So yeah, I hope you like that. I didn't mention it was first fill Oloroso but you could see it on the tasting note. You could probably have realised that without consciously thinking so. Showing you the difference with PX and Oloroso there. Okay, any questions? Are we happy to move on to number 4? We don't need a wee break or anything. Cool. So we'll move on to the first of our PT numbers. Trying to think which way to do this, but I think, yeah, we'll go for the young boy. We'll go for Ardnamurchan and Adelphi combined. I'll tell you how in a moment. But we've got the Adelphi private stock cask strength reserve. So we've got a blended whiskey, a B word. Grant, did you want to say something there? Sorry.
Sorry, it was an absolute bargain as well. I've actually had some of this before, and for the pricing, it's you guys have done really well.
Hey, cheers! I do appreciate that, and I think I wholeheartedly agree. This was the first time when we released this at the tasting note session, we were all saying, "Jesus, why did we not put our name down for one of these?" And that's not a lie. We don't buy much of our own stuff because we want to keep our relationships going with our partners, but we do get a very good staff price. So we buy probably at least one of each release, and all the Ardnamurchans were buying a bit of each because we've got friends and family wanting loads of them just now. But this was not this wasn't the one that attracted your attention on the price list or the photos and that, so to speak. But once we all tasted it and then we realized the price, honestly, this is going to be the bargain of the night by far, compared to £350 Springbanks.
If you can find a bottle.
If you can find a bottle. There was almost a physical fight over the last bottle in the courtyard last week, wasn't there?
There was.
And Connell was one of the ones who was wanting to buy it off you.
Yeah, so this was retailing at £36. This Adelphi blend, and you just didn't do enough of it. But it tells the story because it's quite an interesting story as to how you put it together. Yeah, so as you might know, you might recognize the Dancy Man from he's our mascot. He's actually Sir William Gladstone. I guess Sir William Gladstone's reanimated corpse in this case, but the Dancy Man is the Adelphi mascot, and he's actually depicted. He was obviously the Prime Minister, but before then, he was the Chancellor, and he's depicted dancing over an ear of barley,
And basically he changed, without going into all the different taxation regimes we've had in Scotch whisky history, most of them being terrible flops, you know, really historic failures. This was back in the days when we were trying to turn the industry from illicit, illegal distilling into a proper, you know, controlled, regulated industry. And I think it took them at least 5 attempts over a very short amount of time to get the taxation right. But William Gladstone made a very key change to the taxation of malt, and he changed it from the originally you had to pay tax when you put your whiskey into the barrel, which obviously incurs the costs before you've been able to sell it, whereas he allowed it to go into bond, and to be the tax to be paid, the duty, which we would now call it, to be paid when you actually bottle the stuff. And essentially the byproduct of that was encouraging people to age their whiskey longer, to mature for a longer time, and it revolutionized the industry overnight, and it made people afford to experiment with longer aging of their whiskies. And this is still long before single malts really existed, of course, but people still all of a sudden weren't forced to bottle their stuff as quick as they could. So the Adelphi Blend is where this guy normally adorns the bottle. It's just called the Adelphi Private Stock, and it's 22 quid on the shelf. It's a blended whiskey, which I'm happy to disclose that we get made on contract for us. But Charlie McLean, who I mentioned earlier, he came up with the initial recipe for it, along with a blending company, and we basically signed up for that recipe until we ever wanted to change it, and as long as the liquid was available. So it's got a huge amount of different whiskies in it. You know, it's basically a tour around Scotland. Most regions are represented. Many whiskies in there. A typical blended whiskey. Lots of grain, but about 40% malt. So it's quite a high malt content to begin with, as blends go. That's the Adelphi Blend, which normally exists all year round at 40%. In this case, we normally receive it in the bottle. Our warehouse is in Fife, where we do all our Adelphi bottlings. We normally get sent it in bottle and we label it up and sell it from there. We do have the option of asking for it to be sent to us in the barrel instead. So we do occasionally do that. So what this is 1 sherry cask of Adelphi Private Stock, and it's been blended with 2 2015 bourbon barrels of peated Ardnamurchan. So you've got 2/3 peated bourbon Ardnamurchan here, and you've got 1/3 sherry cask blended whiskey. So you do therefore have a blended whiskey, but actually we've not made a big song and dance about the Ardnamurchan content because that's been generating enough headlines on its own. We're quite happy to just let the word out about this slowly. But because of that Ardnamurchan content, I think that if you know Ardnamurchan, you will pick up on a lot of that salinity, a lot of the farmhousey, waxy characteristics that we're starting to see develop in that distillery. And it just carries that whiskey so well. It's 57.6%, so it's not it's not playing around. But I honestly, I mean, I totally agree with Grant. I think it really is the value of the night. And on any tasting, I'd happily go into a 40 quid whiskey tasting with this, and be confident it would destroy many others at that price. But at the very least, you know, it would hold its own as a blended whiskey, and as a Scotch whiskey of any kind. How do you find it? Hey Chris, by the way, welcome along.
No, it's really well. So it's like you said, people, unless you try it, you don't know what you're getting. Yeah. People start fighting over the bottle once they've tasted it. So that's why. That's it. Like for my local retailer, it was one of the last ones to sell. Yes. For obvious reasons. But then when you taste it, it's up there.
You know, that's why we didn't do a post about it, because about what was in it. We've been telling people here and there. We're not making any secret of it, but it doesn't say it on the label, you know, 2/3 Ardnamurchan anywhere. Because that would have just pushed it out, and maybe it wouldn't have been drunk at the £36 price point either. So
there you go.
I was quite happy.
Never be drunk.
Yeah, exactly that. And that would be a tragedy for us and for everyone else who couldn't buy one. And here's Peter to the rescue with how to buy a component of this whiskey. We will do more of these. You know, this was the 3 casks mixed together for that reason, so we could do a little bit more.
So, I mean, the standard blend at 22 quid. There's quite a few people drink it around here. We sell loads and loads of it. We definitely take every time we get a delivery from Ardnamurchan or Adelphi, we put a couple of cases in, and there's quite a few fans of the standard blend. So it's as Graeme said, it's well worth having a go at the standard. But this one really brings it up a notch, a notch in 10, I think. It was the first time I tasted it. It was last week when you were down, and I mean, we got 6 bottles on the allocation. One was drank last week, one was drank once tonight. We auctioned one off last week for charity, and then as I think you only let people who bought the standard blend take it. Graeme, is that correct?
Yeah, it is. There was only, I've got a spreadsheet open here in the background. Let me see the numbers again. There was only 906 in the world, which is more than a single cask. But for the UK, we had a small fraction of that, and we thought rather than just give 1 or 2 to everyone, there are some people who without hard sales tactics like yourself that just stock the Adelphi blend throughout the year. And so we thought, well, let's just reward those people who do it without being told there's a reward for it and who stock our everyday blend. You deserve to get the blend on steroids sort of thing, So that's what it looks like. It's very similar to the Adelphi blend private stock itself. It comes with a little bit of tissue wrap, no box, no nothing like that. It looks like a nice old school whiskey, I think. It's not messing around. So you could be forgiven for walking past it on a supermarket. Well, it's not in supermarkets, on a specialist retailer shelf, because there will be a lot of other eye-catching things there. But once you're in the know about this, future batches will be secured quite quickly, I think. Let me just share with you the tasting notes, just so you can see what we think.
So what I'd say is everybody keep buying the standard blend so that we get
I like it. Do your part, And Chris, sorry, just because you've just joined us, we don't have a lineup officially for you. So we've started off with the Springbank, then we've gone on to the Clarendon rum. We've had the 2 sherry numbers, and we're actually on the number 5 now, which is the Adelphi peated blend. And then we're just about to finish on the Breath of the Isles. But Victor has been recording as well, so you can do the strange thing of sitting back and watching it and then seeing yourself appear towards the end as well.
Sounds a good idea. I'm definitely not going to rush these, but I'm also now going to be driving out to the airport later to pick up a member of my family. So I'll be watching the recording back on another night.
No bother. Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for joining it nonetheless.
Still worthwhile tuning in for your chat though.
Oh, second to none, right? So who else is invading your living room with such terrible patter on a night like this? So that's what we thought of it on the screen there. Some of the hallmarks of Ardnamurchan there. I mean, I say hallmarks. We're a year into it now in terms of releasing, but as an employee, we're really getting to grips with certain characters that we're finding, particularly in the bourbon casks. We talk about the funk there, Hessian sacks, horses, cheese rinds, leather, all things you might think you would never want to pay money to taste. But I think in a whiskey setting, it can work beautifully. There's a little bit of this herbaceous minerality. We talk about menthol earlier. We talked about eucalyptus earlier. We definitely get quite a menthol undertone to a lot of Ardnamurchan spirit. We've talked about eucalyptus in the past with it. Alex has talked about glacier mints before as well. And that's probably where you're getting the cooling mouthfeel too. But yeah, we weren't messing around when we said seriously good. That was literally what I wrote down on my tasting note in my book. So hopefully you'll agree, but I think that's, for 1/10 of the price of the Springer to roughly, then it packs a good punch, that I think. Solid, everyday drinking whiskey.
So Graeme, since this is as close to drinking single malt Ardnamurchan, tell us a wee bit about where you are with the Ardnamurchan releases. You've just done, I can't remember the number, but there's a 7 on it. It came out a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
How's that been received? And it's
give us
a bit of a story.
Yeah, it's been wild. I'll show you guys, just for those of you who don't know what it looks like, because it has been a little bit elusive in the real world sometimes. This is the new batch of Ardnamurchan. So 0721 refers to the bottling date on our core range. It comes out every 3 months. Ardnamurchan Distillery is in the far western Highlands between Mull and Skye. It's the furthest west you can actually go on the Scottish mainland, if you go slightly beyond the distillery. So we produce peated and unpeated spirit there, 6 months each a year. We do, in our core range, we do predominantly bourbon cask, about 65%, maybe 35% sherry. We really want the spirit to shine through. We're not using a lot of tiny little accelerant casks, or we're not using heavy wine casks or port casks or anything to rush some color and flavor into it. We really are being quite patient with it. The distillery itself started production in 2014, so there are now in the current batch whiskies as old as 7 years in there. It doesn't have an age statement. We just refer to the bottling date and the batch for the year. But as some of you know, if you scan a QR code on the bottle, you get access to a huge amount of production detail, such as the types of barley strain, the temperatures of the mash tun, and the lengths of fermentation, and especially the entire cask recipe will be available on anything we release too. So yeah, there's a huge amount of transparency. It's a pretty wild rural place out there, so we're trying to reflect that in the liquid. As poetic as that might sound, we genuinely want a sense of place to come through there. So I would love to think of it in a few years being mentioned in the same breath as things like Campbelltown distilleries and Talisker and that sort of thing. I do feel like it's coming along quite nicely with a bit of, funk is the word we keep using, and farmhouse is the word we keep using. It's got salinity. There's the age-old argument. You can debate about salinity in whiskey till the cows come home. People like Old Pulteney are famously discussed as that. But then where are the casks aged? Lots of Islay distilleries where people say they taste coastal. Well, it was aged in the Central Belt near Alloa for its whole life. Where was the coastal influence there? But it's an undeniable thing that people talk about. So it's an interesting thought, whether it's subconscious or suggested because you think it's coastal, However, as unbiased as we might attempt to be, we definitely feel like there's a coastal element to the Ardnamurchan whiskey. Whether that is coming because we're near the coast or just frankly and a different thing we can't put our finger on is a different matter, But yeah, it retails for about 45 to 50 quid. Batch 1, 2, and 3 pretty much sold out overnight. They're not small batches. They're 20,000 bottles at a time. But batch 4, I'll happily admit, has been a little bit slower in a good way as far as I'm concerned. It sold out in terms of going to our retailers very quickly, but it is actually on some shelves and some websites still available. A matter of weeks after release, it is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. It's inevitable. It wasn't going to, the demand was unsustainable and it was over the top. We kept trying to say to people, there'll be more, wait your turn. If you can't find it, at the end of the day, it's just a dram. I know we all get really caught up in it sometimes, but there will be more of that dram coming soon in a slightly different guise. So yeah, for us, it's just about keeping up the momentum without it turning from a frenzy into a standstill overnight. But I'm confident with the liquid and the price of it, and hopefully that'll see us through. So we'll see.
I think you priced it really, really. I mean, the liquid's fantastic, and you've done a really good job of making it. But I think where you priced it is just really sensible.
Yeah, I'm really happy with that. As I was saying earlier, very briefly, I joined the company just before we launched it, so I'm just over a year in. And the very first question I asked was, "What are you thinking about pricing of it?" And immediately I was told, "This is drinking whiskey. This is not going to be released as a big, flashy inaugural release that'll be over 100 quid for a 5-year-old dram." So I was right on board from the get-go as soon as they said that. Then it tasted pretty good, which is a good start, you know. So I think it's a good combo. We are really, it's not just marketing bullshit. You know, we genuinely want people to buy this as a staple whiskey in their house, and hopefully it's filling a bit of a gap with stuff that's not out there at the moment. What I would share with you, if you don't mind me plugging someone else, I'll chuck it in here. But if you are wanting to do a real deep dive into the distillery tonight, it is the VPub with Ardnamurchan and Akva Vitae. So if you are into your YouTube whiskey channels, Roy at Aqua Vitae, and who's based in Glasgow, has got a huge number of followers nowadays. What's he got? 18,000 subscribers. So he's a bit of an authority in the YouTube world nowadays. He's just a good whiskey nerd, you know, he's one of us. But he's actually in Ardnamurchan right now with Connell, Alex, Jenny, and they've literally got a setup in the still room in the warehouse. They're going to do a really cool, you know, these things take 2-3 hours usually of an evening. They're going to do an on location live broadcast Q&A type thing. So it should be really cool. It's going to be a proper nerdy deep dive into the distillery. So that's starting in just under an hour. So it'll be the perfect bookend to this if you fancy staying up a bit later as well. He has quite a lot of American fans, so I think he needs to do it a bit later for some people in other parts of the world. But anyway, that's the potted story of Ardnamurchan. There's a lot going on there in terms of future releases, future casks. You know, we've been buying things like Foursquare rum casks direct from Barbados, which is amazing. Really, really a privilege to be able to buy them. Richard Seal, who runs Foursquare, is famously not the most approachable man in the world. He's very, very protective over what he does. If you're into your rums, you will know his name. He's in some respects the authority on rum at the moment in the world. But he's a great guy. He's sorted us out with some casks directly, which he does not do for anybody as far as I'm aware. We've got some Madeira casks, some Sauternes, a little bit of port. Not my favorite cask in the world, in all honesty, but we'll see if it works. We have a grand total of 5 tequila casks coming over, which is just to play around with to see if they work. We are legally allowed to use tequila and mezcal nowadays, if you know that. There's a lot going on.
Graeme, any interest? Because I've had my first mezcal cask and was kind of underwhelmed. Are there any other casks you're curious to get your hands on that are still currently banned by the SWA?
I can't think of any that are banned that I really want to. What I'm really wanting to try and secure, we are working hard to do it just now, is to get some Fino and Manzanilla casks in the door, some really bone dry sherry style casks, because I think theoretically it would work really well with the style. You know, mezcal and tequila, to be totally honest, Chris, like I'm a huge agave spirits fan, but I prefer them unaged, and I'm a little bit of a traditionalist in terms of Scotch whiskey. But so I first of all, when it was discussed as a team, I said, we're not buying it. We're just not doing tequila and mezcal casks, guys. And most people were on the same wavelength. And then I saw Blair Atholl in a mezcal cask from North Star Spirits. And I have to admit, I was like, do you know what? I would like to taste that. And when I did taste it, I was quite happily surprised. Interesting to see your guys' thoughts on the Kilhoman, because that's probably the other noticeable example, I would say. I've not tried it yet, but I like the sound of it on paper, but it's interesting to hear you guys aren't loving it.
Well, Filey Bay are just about to bring out a beer cask, aren't they? An IPA cask.
Yeah.
What do you think of using next beer barrels for?
You know,
what's your take on that?
You know, beer barrels are a great vessel. We potentially could. We genuinely aren't looking at it just now because, you know, we've taken 5 or 6 or 7 years now just to refine what bourbon and sherry does, and quite consciously doing that, you know, not diving into throwing every cask at our distillates and seeing what sticks. We actually went the other way around and learnt what it was doing in quite a narrow way. Now we can theoretically, you know, take a calculated risk on buying certain styles and hope that it will work well. beer could be a good option. You know, I've tried Tomatin, which has been in a stout cask, and quite enjoyed that. You know, I was quite intrigued by the Lagavulin finished in Guinness.
Yeah, the Guinness cask. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on paper that sounds great. So I'm quite happy to embrace these things. It'll never be a main focus of what we do, but we're not against it. And you know, in the other way around, so for example, our South Korean importer, he also imports beer. And he asked me the other day, could we talk about an Ardnamurchan collaboration where you sell us your whiskey casks for us to finish the beers in? So that may well happen in the future, and it may well never see these shores. But you know, beer has a big history of using whiskey casks. Whiskey with beer, not so common, but it can work. So, you know, I think nowadays my traditional militancy has been left at the door a little bit, and if it tastes good, then that's cool. We need to guard the traditions as well, but there is room to play around a wee bit, you know. One of my favorite ever releases was a Calvados cask from Kilkerran. It was a 9-year-old, fully matured in Calvados. It was under their work in progress range, but it was just weird, you know. It wasn't necessarily the best thing ever, but it was just really memorable, a bit different. And I thought, hey, I'm glad they were allowed to do this. I'm glad they did it. So if we only sat on bourbon and sherry forever, we wouldn't be going any further necessarily, you know?
That's right.
But I should always qualify that by saying I do feel the industry as a whole maybe goes a little bit too heavy on the wood makes the flavor type attitude. There is a huge amount to be said for the dominance of wood and the effect it has on spirits, no doubt. But you have to make good new make spirit before it even gets close to a cask. And I think most people do that, but I think in the marketing materials, the raw spirit gets left behind occasionally. So I prefer to, you know, like we spent a huge amount of time before my time fine-tuning the spirit itself and making sure you're starting with good liquid. Because if you put shite liquid in there, it's going to come out shite. You know, it might be a polished shite, but it will nonetheless be a turd. So we need to be careful with putting good liquid in there in the first place.
Yeah, but doesn't English whiskey, is it not bound by the same strict rules as Scottish?
So is
English whiskey allowed to play around more?
English whiskey, to a degree, can do what they like. You know, in general, that's not the case. They basically adopted a Scotch whiskey framework, but it's not protected in the same manner as Scotch as a GI, you know, geographical indicator. It's not as heavily regulated, so there is more experimentation going on in England, a lot of it to be applauded. But yeah, they've just taken the approach of sort of saying, well, we'll loosely follow the Scotch whiskey rules. They don't have a huge overarching board like the Scotch Whisky Association that's really, you know, people pay to join SWA, and basically what they say is goes. But you know, if I see Philip mentioning Bimber there, the day we came to Southport, Connell and I stopped in at the lakes for a quick look around. We didn't do a tour or anything, we just saw the site. I hear good things about Filey Bay down on the East Coast. I've been to the Cotswolds distillery personally, and I really like what they're doing. I've tried some English whiskies which are totally forgettable, but I've tried some Scotch whiskies which are totally forgettable too. So honestly, if there's new people doing stuff, I'm happy, and they should be congratulated. You know, it's an expensive, labor-intensive process to make a whiskey distillery work. So.
One thing actually that kind of makes me think, Graeme, you're sort of alluding to the rye, you know, up in Scotland. The one thing I think English whiskey has done appallingly is rye. The ones I've had have universally been awful, genuinely awful.
Yeah, I've only, I think it was Oxford that did one. I think I tried Oxford, a little bit of that.
I've had two. That was undrinkable. Then really? the East London Liquor Company, I think, have done one.
Oh yes, yeah, forget about them.
Well, they're short-lived. They're short-lived run. So I do hope if any rye does come to Scotland, good God.
There was one released by Arbiki, which is a gin distillery, but they are a whiskey distillery, but they've not released whiskey yet. But the rye was, we've got to be careful here because I like what they do, but it was wildly expensive. And you know,
that one like that Little Brown Dog. Yeah, the rye class.
So yeah, little brown dog is a different style because he independently bottled an American rye whiskey, so it wasn't Scotch in production as far as I'm aware. It was a rye whiskey, but he will then be reusing the rye cask to put some Scotch in. And there's been rye cask finished whiskies out there for a long time. Yeah. I don't know if you would taste the difference in a wood in wood that's had different grains in it. That's me just playing devil's advocate. Circumstance is interesting there. Philip was saying that I've only come across them recently, doing a rice whiskey. Are they in Bristol? Am I right in saying that?
Tasting set of theirs, which actually includes the rye. I've got to get through that at some point. But yeah, they're Bristol.
Yeah, I mean, we were down in Bath after the tasting on the tour. We went to Hideout for a few hours, well-known bar down there, and the guys, they did a really mean highball, really cool highball, and it said house blend times circumstance. And I was saying, so what's the deal then? And he said, yeah, circumstance is mad. Like, we've not just blended a Scotch whiskey with them. We've made this weird English whiskey with like rice distillates and heavily toasted wheat and all sorts of weird stuff like that. So circumstance is cool. I'm looking out for what they're going to do, and they wouldn't be allowed to do it in Scotland. So it speaks highly of what you can do, but it's a fine balance between regulation and innovation, which can be a dirty word. But people do complain about the restrictiveness of the SWA sometimes, but on a global scale, it really does protect this multi-billion-pound industry that's crucial for the UK's export market. So it's not as romantic, but they are the ones who are going out there and making sure folk in India are not bottling Johnny Black with 3Ks on the end of it and getting away with it, or whatever it might be. So it's a very crucial part of the industry.
I think it is more romantic. I think something heavily regulated. You know what you're getting.
Definitely.
Other countries can play around, do what they want, but Scotch has got its set of rules, and that is why Scotch is revered around the world. Sure.
Yeah. It's simple to understand. It's 3 years old plus. The numbers on it are guaranteed.
Yeah.
If I buy a Ron Zacapa 23-year-old rum from Guatemala, that 23-year-old literally means nothing. And that's an average at best, but they're allowed to put it prominently on the bottle.
Yeah.
Saying that something like tequila, which you might think is a Wild West sounding spirit, highly, highly regulated, really heavily regulated. They've got a thing called the NOM out there. Every bottle of proper 100% agave tequila you ever buy, there's a 4-digit number on it. You can type it into the tequila website and it'll tell you the producer of it, where they're based, the owners, huge amount of detail, sister brands they own, all sorts of stuff. So we could be more regulated, we could be less regulated. It's an interesting discussion, Pricing is a difficult one though, because there's a lot of cool liquid out there around the world. We're trying to buy international stuff as well, but I'm very weary of going down the 250 quid for a 4-year-old Scottish rye route, for example. I have to say carefully, Boutique released a 40-day-old circumstance recently, and I'm pretty sure it was like 85 quid for a 50 cl of 40-day-old grain spirit. And it might be cool, but who's buying it? Who is buying all these things? So anyway, it's just plain devil's advocate. I love what a lot of these guys do, but I wouldn't personally get away with doing those things necessarily. But always happy to hear if anyone's got any other, hot distillery that they're following. Tell us, and we'll try and buy some and do an Adelphi version of it. Because honestly, there's a whole discussion to be had about new age distilleries, and will there be an independently bottled Lindors or Wolfburn or whatever it might be.
So I've the one weird thing, I'm quite a big collector of Smygen, the Swedish whiskey distillery. Would you ever go abroad?
Yeah. There's a lot of that. The Berries recently did their Nordics range. If you saw that, Berry Brothers.
Yeah,
but again, and this price there's the one there, Phillips in, and they did High Coast and things like that. But it was all 2016 distillates for 150 quid a bottle, and I really did applaud. I know Johnny and Claire and the team at Berries quite well, it was a great project, but it's a difficult sell in the home of Scotch whiskey. 150 quid for a 5-year-old Norwegian distillate or whatever it might be. That's just the price that dictates that. So they said yes to that price and they decided they could sell it. We might have been more cynical and said, we just can't sell it for that price. Sorry. But that is the thing. Australian whiskey, there's been 5-year-old Larks at £3 million a bottle or whatever they retail at. There's a lot of expensive whiskey out there in less historic centres of whiskey production. So it's a difficult sell sometimes. But see, just as a simple booze geek, there's a lot of cool stuff to try out there. So it's just, there's a lot of stuff fighting for our money at the moment, you know. So it's always got to be Ardnamurchan that wins that one, right? You could buy 3 bottles of that for your 5-year-old Fairy Lacan. That would be it. So I've said that entirely wrong as well. Okay, I'm enjoying the discussion, but let's get on to the final dram, because I can see some of you are probably looking at your keyboard saying, yep,
it's half finished.
We're going to finish with our Breath of the Isles. And we have, sorry, 2 seconds, just making sure I've got an empty glass for it. So we've got 14-year-old Breath of the Isles with Adelphi. Let me show you what it looks like. With Adelphi, we do, so we've got so many windows open now. I've got Ardnamurchan bottlings here. You might have come across the Breaths range before. So it's officially called the Breath of the Angels range. And if I can find it, 0721 on the master drive, here we are. There's them. So angelic little cherub balancing on a cask there, getting wrecked already. I wonder if you could actually get drunk as an angel. But he is putting his effort in. I say he, hopefully that kneecap is obscuring any evidence of that. But the Angels share is obviously where this comes from. And the Breath of the Angels series is essentially a clever way that we bottle in Adelphi things that we're not allowed to name officially. So we do buy a lot of cool casks of whiskey. And as you guys may well know, you're sometimes not allowed to disclose what they are. And that's beyond the Springbank that we tried earlier, that we just weren't allowed to say Hazelburn. There's a huge amount of distilleries out there that will never allow an independent bottling of, say, for example, Glenmorangie or Balvenie, which comes out as Burnside as a teaspooned malt. Lots of things happen that brands will maybe happily sell you a cask, but they will protect the branding of it, and that's totally fine. You know, I totally understand why they don't want cretins like us just coming along and sticking it in a basic bottle and saying, "There's your Balvenie," and they've worked so hard to create this global image of it. So there's a reason they do it, but they will also happily sell surplus liquid for money. You know, that's the way the world works. And there's a huge amount of amazing whiskey floating around the Scotch world that is undisclosed. So to disclose this to you, as I said earlier, it is Highland Park. They're one of those ones who's on the cusp of, I think they're being unnamed more than named nowadays, actually. Whereas you used to see a lot of Highland Parks just straight out. That was fine. We did a breath of Islay, 21-year-old recently, just before I joined, and that was Lagavulin. You'll never see an indie Lagavulin, but as soon as you tell people what they're drinking, they're like, 21-year-old single cask Lagavulin. Yes, please, you know. So these are cool things to buy. And again, a little bit like the Adelphi cask strength, this one, I would say when we went out to people and said, this is what you can have, because we're in a privileged position with Adelphi where we do say, this is what we have allocated for you. Would you like to buy what we're offering you? You know, it's a very niche world we live in. But I think the Breath of the Isles was the one where most people, because this was actually four hoggies put together. So this is 1,000 bottles plus, 1,000, what have we got, 20 in total. And I should say as well, sorry, 58.3%. But this was the one where probably the only one where people came back and said, you know, instead of 18, I'll take 12. Instead of 12, I'll take 6 or whatever. Some people just didn't order it. And I could have went back to them and said, That's 14-year-old HP, by the way. But I just thought, you know what? We'll allow it to go through, slipping through the net, and somebody else will take it, and they'll find out in the future what they've not purchased. But this is, again, the sort of thing. I chose this last for a reason. It's refill sherry, 14-year-old cask strength Highland Park. And that is a nice thing to say. You know, that's a nice collection of words in the mouth. There's some cool, you know, Highland Park. I don't know what you guys think of it. It's nowadays it's in a bit of an odd position in the world. I think there's a huge amount of Highland Park fans in the world, but I don't know how many fans they are necessarily creating on a day-to-day basis nowadays.
It's like being a Catholic. I'm definitely a lapsed Highland Park fan. I think
that's a great way to put it, Chris, for sure. Like, we want to like it.
Yeah,
it should be liked, but they're just delving a little bit too deep into some mythology and some marketing, and frankly, just not doing the liquid justice. I'm quite happy to say that. You know, they produce a wonderful liquid there, and they don't necessarily end up making their way into the bottle. So I think, hopefully, this is the sort of thing that will remind you why people used to love Highland Park, because I personally love this dram. I think this is Highland Park, when it's on form for me, hits all points of the compass. You know, it's got a bit of smoke, it's got some heat, it's got some floral character, it's pretty fruity, it's pretty earthy as well. Highland Park really can have it all if you get it in the right sort of format. So hopefully that's a nice one to finish on. It's not as heavily peated as some drams you might try. It's nicely balanced, actually, I think.
We've got one left. We've got one left on the website, and I think you sent us 6 of them. Graeme, I can't remember, to be honest.
Yeah, that would have been right. I think if I look at it now, yeah. So when I was saying about 18s and things, that is nonsense. There was 200 of this in the UK, out of 1,000, which is a generous amount for the UK. We do look after the UK being the home of the whiskey, you know. But 200 divided by 25 or so Adelphi stockists is not a lot. Our Demerkin, there's about 100 people stocking it nowadays, and all I'm getting asked is, when can we get Adelphi? And we say, basically, never, unless we can change something. You know, we're pretty much stuck there. So let me just check as well. That's £73 retail, roughly 75, 76 pounds for a 14-year-old HP. That's pretty decent, if you ask me.
Yeah, cask strength as well.
Yeah. So final thing to show you on that one is the tasting note. Breath of the Isles. So as I say, 4 refill Oloroso Hoggies. And to admit my the wankometer on this one was the pumpernickel bread for me. That was the one that sent it haywire. But it's just brown bread, isn't it? Danish flat brown bread, or whatever it would be. But nice, deep earthy bread. That crunchy nut cornflakes was somebody else's suggestion, which I thought was great. Beach debris, I quite like that one as well from Alex. Just, you know, he didn't specify the debris. It was just stuff on the beach, you know, which was quite good, I thought. And then, you know, you want to find a bit of seaweed and a bit of that salty edge in your Highland Park, but I think that's just a really proper balanced dram, as we've said in the tasting note there.
It is a cracker. We had it last week and we've got it again this week. It's a beauty. It's a beauty finish on.
I'm really happy with it. You know, it shows the less magic side of independent bottling is just buying some good stuff and putting it in a bottle. We didn't even do anything to it. We just mixed some of it together and we put it in a bottle. You know, it's kind of the reverse alchemy, I think, sometimes is what some of the official bottlers do. You know, I love a lot of what the official bottling world does, but
yeah, didn't swallow it down my throat. I swallowed it down my chest.
That'll remind you where your chest is then.
Yeah.
But you know, I think of that there's certain distilleries that I think just work so much better as an indie release than an official release. Highland Park being one of the crucial ones. Sorry if you see me clicking away, it's because I'm trying to get my dead mouse to do something. let me see if this works. Does that stop sharing? Good. Good old Alt F4. So yeah, I think Highland Park, something like maybe Glenrothes. There's a few distilleries out there that I think I get really excited when I see them on the indie world, but I don't really mind so much about what they're doing in the official world. And that's fine, you know, they've got different considerations than us when they're releasing all their stuff. But yeah, that's the kind of final dram of the night, guys. We basically just had a wee ramble tonight rather than a proper presentation, but it's always nice to have a discussion, a bit of engagement with the group. I do want to do a little favorite dram of the night vote if I can actually get my fucking mouse to move itself along to the other side of my screen. There we go. So we'll
do your wee poll. I assume you're going to publish it, and then we'll stop the recording.
Yes, cool.
And if you want to hang around for 5-10 minutes afterwards, then
let me try to find my wee poll, Victor.
Come on,
life's typical problems. Honestly, the mouse is driving me mental. I've ordered a real one, but what's happening here? Right, sorry, 2 seconds. Honestly, I do have it. In fact, if you're the co-host, can you see it at the bottom of your screen?
Polls. Yeah.
There you go. It's a two-parter.
There we go. Shall I launch it?
Go for it. So the first one is multiple choice. If you scroll down, you'll see the second one is single choice. So you've got what did you like and what was the best, essentially. And I nearly put what was your favorite beside Clarendon saying you masochist, but I thought that'd be harsh because I love it.
Well, Clarendon's my second favorite of the night. So.
Excellent, Chris.
Favorite is very difficult. I'm stuck between two.
All right, that's the way I like to hear it. If it's a difficult choice, then we're on to a winner.
All right, well, I've gone for it anyway. So we'll see.
That Highland Park's gone down well.
Yeah.
Excellent. 7 of 7. There you go, Graeme. Can you see that?
I can see. Yes, I can now. Cool. We've all participated, which is good. So if I'll try and take over now. I seem to have a working mouse, and we'll share. I'm not sure if you could all see it at the same time as us. So everybody liked something tonight on question 1, which is my base kind of expectations of a tasting. And then we've got quite a nice split on the favorites. And it's the unassuming little Highlander Teaninich, which takes it home. That's pretty cool. A little bit of peat. Nobody on the Clarendon, which I'm entirely surprised about. But Blair Atholl, I thought we might have some fans of some weird whiskey out there too. But hey, honestly, any tasting that doesn't result in 100% votes for the same dram is a success in my opinion, because that's the beauty of whiskey, right? If we all like the same stuff, we would just do one dram and say, well, that's the best whiskey in the world, guys. We all agree. See you later. And there would be no whiskey shops. So yeah, just to finish off, I guess, I am going to dive onto that Zoom in 10 minutes. I need to get in the background and just check they're all getting on sorted for their VPub. But yeah, thanks very much for having me tonight, guys. It's been a real pleasure. Nice little cozy group tonight, but I hope you enjoyed yourself.
It's been great. Thanks, Graeme. Thanks as always. You've always laid out some great whiskey in your career, no matter what team you've played for. And always appreciate it. It was great to see you last week.
Yeah, we had a blast. Honestly, it was it was by far the most loose night of the whole week. I mean, it was the first one on the road, but it was also just shackles off. We're seeing people